Now I know you're all sitting here going, it's been 1 week of waiting to find out what happened with Clyde Peters. Because Clyde Peters had been in the jungle and trying to find the survivors of Lanza 508, and then he'd had all these terrible things happen, most of which he caused himself, and then he found himself across the stream from a crocodile that charged at him. And you guys have waited a whole week. And I even last night didn't give you a cliffhanger. Remember? Because I told you we're not going to need a cliffhanger. We're going to resolve a cliffhanger today. But my dark, twisted little heart wants to give you one more cliffhanger. And so, the story I'm going to tell you right now is not the continuation of that story from last week. You're going to get it. You're going to get it. But I'm going to continue that part about the crocodile attacking him after the break that we take right after this, okay? Go ahead. No, I like that sound. No, yes, it makes me just a little bit happy inside. So instead, right now, I'm going to tell you a separate little story that took place in Peru as well, okay? Then you're only going to have like half an hour from now, you're going to find out what happened with the crocodile. You were able to wait a whole week. You can wait a little bit longer. So Clyde Peters, do you remember when he was little, there was something he had wanted to be and it caused him to jump off the chicken coop roof? What was it he wanted to be? A paratrooper. He wanted to be a paratrooper. He wanted to be all ready to defend people, to fight, jump out of a plane, come down in a parachute, and be able to go behind enemy lines and take on the enemy. Well, you know what? There's a story in the book that proves that it's not just humans who want to be paratroopers. And I'm going to prove it to you. So, in the 1980s, Clyde had arrived into Peru in the 1960s. In the 1980s, a big group of terrorists started taking over large areas of the jungle. They were called Shining Path. And they took over large parts of the jungle, and it got so bad and so dangerous that the government of Peru told all the missionaries, you're going to have to leave. We can't protect you from all the terrorists that are going on, that are growing drugs in the jungle, and they're smuggling things, and they've got weapons, and they're killing people. You must all go home. And so Clyde Peters and his family had to pack up. Alfredo Calvermatter and his family had to pack. All the different SDA mission stations that had airstrips, they all had to send their missionaries home. And before they left, the missionaries would get together with whichever villages they've been serving with, and they would tell them, please stay faithful. God will protect you. Stay true. Remember that God has promised. We have nothing to fear except that we forget how Jesus has led us in our past history. Think about how your lives have gotten better while we've been here teaching you about Jesus and how Jesus loves you so much. Stay faithful. And then all the missionaries had to go back to the United States. And the Shining Path terrorists kept spreading out new villages, and they eventually arrived at the village of Amaqueria. Amaqueria had mainly Seventh-day Adventists. It was a really big, popular stronghold for Seventh-day Adventists. And the terrorists arrived, and the leader, along with his 40 soldiers, marched into the village. And it wasn't just a total of 40 soldiers for the terrorists. This is just one of the gangs that was all working in this terrorist group. They marched into the village of Amaqueria, and they found the town leader, and they said, we're going to want you to grow coca for us. What drug do you think you can make from something called coca? Cocaine. We want you to grow the coca for us so we can harvest it and then send it. We are able to smuggle it off to other countries and get very rich from this. And they said, no, we're not going to do that. We don't use drugs ourselves. We would not want to participate in any way to help somebody else put something in their body that would harm them. And the leader said, we heard about you type of people. We knew that you would give us trouble. Well, you have 1 day to decide. And if you do not decide to do what we say, we will come back and we will wipe out your village. And then we will own it and we will grow the coca and we'll bring other people to grow it for us. It will not matter what you try to do. And they left. And the people all gathered together and they prayed, which is pretty much the only thing you can do in a situation like that. They prayed and they went to bed. Well, that night, see, the leader was sneaky. He had said, I'll come back tomorrow. They were planning on coming back that night. He wasn't going to even give them a chance to make up their minds. They came back in the night, and they surrounded the village. They started sneaking through the jungle up towards the edges of the village. And as they were sneaking up, they heard a sound overhead. And they looked up, and they saw a plane, and not just a small plane like the kinds that Clyde Peters would fly from airstrip to airstrip, but a pretty big plane, like a military plane. And all the men stopped what they were doing and looked up, and they stayed quiet. Now, it was dark. They're in the jungle. They're in camouflage. They're not worried about being seen because it's nice and dark. Or at least it was nice and dark, until all of a sudden, light started falling out of the plane. And they all stood there with their mouths open, looking, trying to figure out what was going on. Who's throwing lights out of the plane? Are they like big flashlights? They're very bright. In fact, it's starting to make the trees light up around us. It's super bright. And then they suddenly saw, and it turned into parachutes coming down. And it was paratroopers jumping down. And the paratroopers had huge spotlights on their heads. And they had big spotlights in their hands. And they were sweeping them around, back and forth. And the terrorists all said, we got to get out of here. For some reason, the government sent a bunch of paratroopers to defend the tiny jungle village of Amaqueria. Let's get out of here. And they ran off into the jungle. And they regrouped. What could have possibly happened? What could have possibly happened? There's no way that the government would send paratroopers into the jungle to defend the little village of Amaqueria. Maybe we were seeing things. Maybe we all were too drunk. Maybe it was too hot and we got confused. We'll have to go back. Yes, that's what we'll do. Tomorrow, we'll go back. We'll go back at night, and then we'll come into the village with our guns and our grenades, and we'll just blow up the whole place. Yeah, that's what we'll do. So they got ready. That following day, the villagers were all still praying. The terrorists did not come. Okay, hopefully they're going to leave us alone. And they went to bed that night. And that night, the terrorists got ready, and they surrounded the jungle village again. And they crept closer and closer, and it was nice and dark. The whole village was so dark. You could barely see little flickering lights here and there from a couple little candles in some huts, or a little bonfire, a little cooking fire. And they crept closer and closer, and they were still within the rim of the jungle around the village, when all of a sudden, in the main building at the center of the village, a bright light shone out of every window. Now, these buildings were made from thatch roofs, so the light even came out of the roofs, because these roofs weren't perfectly sealed. There was space that light could come out. It was shot up into the sky. It shot out through the walls. It shot out through the windows. What building do you think was the main building at the center of a village of people who were mainly Seventh-day Adventist believers by that point? It was a church. It was a church, and the church was just poof, blowing light out. And the terrorists were shattering their eyes, like, how can they have a light so bright? We didn't even hear a generator going off. How can they be making such bright lights? And then as their eyes adjusted, they saw the doors to the church open. And out marched a bunch of soldiers. It was the paratroopers. And they came out, and they were just strong and muscular and big and pretty scary looking. And they surrounded the church. And then they started marching outwards in a widening circle from the church out towards the edge of the village. And how long do you think the terrorists stayed watching to see what was going to happen at that point? Boom, they were gone. They ran off into the jungle again. And they regrouped. What could be happening? Why would the government send military reinforcements for the little town of Amaqueria? That doesn't make any sense at all. We're going to wait. They'll get bored. They will leave. We will just go away for a while. And in a few weeks, we'll come back. And we'll catch them by surprise, and then we can take over the village of Amaqueria. We love that village. It's settled right where we need it to be for the right amount of water and the right amount of open land to grow our coca. We need to have that village. So they left it alone. And they went and terrorized other villages for a while, as terrorists would. And then they came back a few weeks later, and they set a date, and they met in the jungle, all 40 of them with their leader, and they all came, and they came creeping up to the village. And this time, as they came up, there was nobody coming from the sky. As they got closer, there was no bright lights in the middle of the village. And as they got closer, there was no soldiers guarding the village. And in fact, they realized, it's so quiet. It's like there's nobody in the village at all. So they walked into the village. Not only did the soldiers leave, the people left. Let's take their stuff. So they kicked open all the doors to the huts, and they went around taking anything that looked of value, and breaking things, and smashing things, and knocking things over. For some reason, they left the church building alone, though. They were a little too nervous to go to the church building. And then they left, and they said, we accomplished what we need to do. The village is abandoned. We'll go and meet up with our main group. We'll make plans to send people to live here, and we'll be able to grow coca. It's great. Let's go. And they got on one of the jungle trails, and they started heading down the jungle trails in the middle of the night, heading off to one of the other villages where they knew another band was so they could hook up with them. And as they went along, all of a sudden, they came to an area in the jungle where there was a broad turn in the jungle path. And as they came around it, out from all around them, hopped a bunch of Peruvian army soldiers, and gunfire filled the air. And the terrorists, and they were shooting back and forth, and only 3 of the terrorists managed to escape. all the others were killed. And the 3 who escaped ran back up the path, and they ran and ran, and they ran and ran, and they ran and ran until they got all the way back to Amaqueria. Maybe we can hide there. Maybe we can find a place to hide. But when they got to Amaqueria, it was no longer deserted. Morning was coming up, and for some reason, there were people in the village again. All the people were there. And they saw the 3 terrorists run out of the jungle and come to a stop. Help us, please. The army, they're coming for us. Please give us shelter, hide us. And the villagers said, come on, you look tired. Come on, come in. Our stuff is broken. Our cooking pots are stolen, but we'll find a way to feed you. Come in. And they brought them in, and they brought them right up to the church, which is the only building that wasn't damaged. And they took them inside the church, and you should have seen the eyes on those 3 terrorists as they walked into the church, looking around. Came in, they sat them down, they brought them some food. Terrorists ate, and then they said, "Are the paratroopers?" The villagers looked at each other. What? The what? The paratroopers, the ones with the big spotlights that came out of the sky. We don't know what you're talking about. Well, then what about the soldiers who were here in the church and that surrounded it and protected it when we were coming to attack one time? We still don't know what you're talking about. Well, then what about the bright light? How do you make the bright light come out of this building? We don't even see a generator in here or anything. We don't have a generator. The brightest light we have in our building is a candle. We could light all our candles at once and you wouldn't be able to see it out of this building. We don't understand. And then one of the jungle people, one of the Amaqueria villagers realized what was going on. He said, just a moment. I need to read to you from the Bible. And he opened it up to the book of 2 Kings. And he read to them a story. A story you might remember if you were here last year. Something about a man named Elisha and his servant. And their city being surrounded by enemy soldiers. And the servant panicking. Oh no! What are we going to do? And then Elisha praying, Lord, open the eyes of my servant. And what did he see? All around, not just the city, but surrounding the enemy armies that were around the city, what did he see? Angels and chariots of fire. Horses and chariots of fire, glowing brightly. And the man read that to them, and they said, that must be what it is. That's what it's describing. Everything was glowing. It was so bright, brighter than any light we could make here. What is that? And they explained to them about the angels and how the angels surround to protect. And they explained to them about how when you are following Jesus' leading and you're standing for the truth, that you don't need to be afraid, because anywhere with Jesus you can safely go. Anywhere he leads you in this world below. And the 3 soldiers looked at each other, and their eyes were just so wide. They couldn't believe what had happened. 2 of the soldiers left the village later that day to go on and try to find their old friends and hopefully be able to continue their terrorizing ways. But I'd call them soldiers, one of those terrorists stayed behind in the village. He wanted to hear more about what they were reading in that book, and he wanted to hear more about why God would try to send people, or angel paratroopers, to come down and protect this little village that had just stood up for what they believed. And that one terrorist ended up being converted there in that village. He ended up being baptized later on. When missionaries returned to Peru, he was baptized by one of the missionaries who came back, Bob Seamount. And he ended up becoming an elder in his church and a witness to people of how God can change lives. Because it's not just humans like Clyde Peters who want to be paratroopers, who want to go out there and be putting their lives on the line and standing in defense of those who need defending. God's angels are over you. They want to come with reinforcements anytime you need them. They want to jump down in reinforcements around you that you might never see yourself, but that your enemies will go, whoa, there's too much protection going on here. That person is a Christian who's standing up for Jesus, and they're not going to turn away no matter what we try to threaten them with. We're not going to mess with them, because look at the protection they have. Protection they might not even know about until someday in heaven, when that shining big paratrooper will walk up to you and say, hi, I'm your angel. Man, have I had a good time defending you. Thanks for standing for Jesus, because then that gave me so much fun to go and do all sorts of cool things. You and your angel are going to have so many cool stories to talk about. And we're going to have one more story to talk about after the break today. But thank you for listening to that story of the angel paratroopers.